As you start to grow as a property investor and you start to explore different areas, different locations, and also meet new professionals, there's a lot of secrets, and there's definitely a clique there that you start to build yourself around and professionals you start to have around you. I've got Belinda Botzolis here today, and you may have seen her as the valuer on Instagram or her business Add Value. And it's great to have her here because I'm really going to open up a lot of the secrets, a lot of the things that I, as a property investor and a professional in this space for a number of years as an accountant, get to show you through a lens of what I do or what I say or how I speak to certain professionals, but also open up the doors to the secrets that a lot of people, as you start to build portfolios, build the network around you, these are the secrets that you want to unlock, and these are the secrets I'm going to share with you here today with Belinda.
Everything school should have taught you in one place. With a property portfolio of over 17 million and an accountancy firm of over 16,000 clients, as well as being an accountant to some of the wealthiest people in Australia, Jeremy Iannuzzelli will be sharing his lessons on everything school should have taught you so you can build the life you want.
Welcome to What School Should Have Taught You, a podcast where I share with you all the things you need to know about building true financial freedom. I'm going to share with you today a very special guest, and I've said it to you just before, Belinda Botzolis. Belinda, how are we?
I'm well, thanks for having me.
I hope I nailed that. I know before we were talking about the pronunciation of your last name.
Yep.
And we're sharing a bit of our history and where we grew up and the things that we did, I suppose, in our professional careers. But I'm really excited to have you here because I'm a bit of a fan of the things that you do.
Thank you.
You are definitely an industry leader in the valuation space and definitely a very strong woman in that space as well, which has been a very male-dominated area for a number of years. But what I love about what you do is you're so articulate with how you explain your profession. Okay. It's not about just going there and ticking a couple boxes and saying that's a value, but you actually really try to add a lot of expertise and in your videos and a lot of the things that you do for many of the people who listen to Belinda. And again, look her up on Instagram, Belinda the Valuer. But you actually share a lot of these secrets to the people that watch your content. So I'm really excited to have you here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's going to be a good one. I think we're going to cover a lot. And thanks for having me.
Well, I've got some questions. And today I really want to get for all of the listeners of What School Should Have Taught You, the secrets of professionals.
Yep.
I feel sometimes, and I know in my space, in my industry, it's all about harnessing your intellectual property, not letting it get out of the box, and getting a huge fee for sharing that level of information. But what school should have taught you is more than that. It's about really giving everyone the knowledge and sharing expertise, because the more knowledge people have, the bigger they grow, and the surrounding professionals, become better from that. So one of the first questions I really want to ask you, and it's something that's really prevalent in the industry at the moment, it's all about this topic of hotspots.
Oh, yes.
We talk about hotspots and where's the next boom location and Perth, and I'm looking for the next Perth or the next Bunbury or Australian or what's happening in the northern parts of Queensland. But the question I've got to ask you about these hotspots is, does it play into your mind as a valuer? Do you take those surrounding heat in the market and all this demand, does that really sway your decision in terms of valuing a property?
I think first and foremost, when we do talk about hotspots, by the time they become hotspots, and then a lot of people say this, the heat's already off. If you're buying when it's lukewarm, before it gets hot is usually when you get in. When we value homes, and what anyone listening to this needs to understand is we value it on a vacant possession. And that's really important to understand because we value it assuming that it's going to be purchased by a homeowner, not an investor, because you value it on a vacant possession. Commercial property, different. You value it subject to the lease on title or whatever lease is currently in place. Residential property is vacant. So we need to, of course, understand who the market is to understand the value that the market put on the property. But we need to make sure that we are understanding what the real value is, not the inflated value. And that sounds a little bit, well, how do you know what an inflated value is and a market value? Because at the end of the day, we are doing that report as a document that the bank is going to rely on, and that is what the bank is going to use as security. So they want to know, as a valuer, what is that home worth if it was to go to auction literally that afternoon? What would it sell for? What's it worth? Because we want to secure that as security for the loan. So if you're telling us it's worth $1 million, and they don't want to pay LMI and they want to be $800,000, then we can secure an $800,000 loan on a 20% deposit on $1 million valuation. Now, if we are seeing areas that are sort of, as you say, hotspots, we need to be a little bit careful, because is this an area that in this moment in time has got a very strong value? Because again, essentially it comes down to a supply and demand situation. So if the demand is predominantly from investors and predominantly coming from a segment of the market where they are investor focused, we have to be a little bit careful, because investors are very, they can fluctuate between areas really quickly. Again, the word hot. This area is hot, quick, jump on that. That area is hot, quick, jump on that. Jump out of that. Everyone's selling, I'm selling, I'm going to jump. So the bank want to know that, is this a slightly inflated price because an area has become quite popular? Valuers are like investigators, so we communicate. We have meetings constantly, and if we are seeing something and we bring it up in a meeting. So we'd be like, guys, has anyone noticed XYZ's happening in the southwest lately? What are you seeing? An example that we can talk about is the airport, the Western Sydney Airport, Southwest Sydney Airport. And, you've been around long enough to know, how long has it been going that the values are going to go up because of the airport? The values are going to go up because of the airport. At today's date, we have no evidence of that as such as yet, okay? They may not go up. They may go up triple than what we expected, or certain pockets only go up and everything else stays exactly the same. But imagine you had I think we spoke before about like forums and conversations that people are having, and all of a sudden there was an isolated hotspot in an area because of a certain reason, and it's not backed by anything. And that's the problem.
That's where I want to probably lead this next part of the question, is that you guys as valuers, are you following the content that's happening on forums or marketing, or are you talking about where specific amounts of buyers agents are buying? Because the data that they're all using across a couple of platforms can be, and I'm not going to use the word manipulated in a way that someone's behind changing the numbers, but manipulated in the sense of you've got a number of people that are all specifically buying in one area. Well, then that throws out your data, and it suggests that an area might be much better than what it could be, and it means that a lot more buyers agents will then start to focus on that area and a supply will increase. Is that conversation happening in the background or not?
It is, and this is why a valuer has to be really skilled at eliminating the noise, okay, and really isolating the property for what it is. We need to make sure that we are looking at it as, and I can't speak for all valuers, but for me, I always sort of visualize the market as, and I've said this a couple of times, as human beings. And I use this example all the time. I'm going to hold up, all for those that are listening and not watching, I'm holding up all 10 fingers. And let's just say each finger represents represents a person. That person is 10% of the market. So if we've got an area that all of a sudden you've got 70% of your market are investors, where prior to that it was only really 30% of the market, we are seeing sort of a premium paid for properties. It's our job to really isolate and understand why all of a sudden it's, hang on a minute, I'm noticing that every valuation that we're doing or every loan that we're doing is an investor loan. You have conversations with agents. We don't just turn up value and then leave.
So you're being told that the person that's buying this particular property is an investor?
We sometimes, not all the time, we don't know. That is private and privileged information. But you've been doing this long enough that you can sort of figure it out.
No, you know.
Yeah.
And how about lending though? Is the banks advising you saying, hey, this person's going for a 90% loan with LMI or an 80% loan?
No, I wish they did. I really do. Because sometimes...
Would that persuade your decision?
Well, I know that if, we can get into this off topic, but if I know that they're only borrowing 50 or 60%, and I'm tossing up between, because you've got some sales evidence that are conflicting, like is it 1.3 or 1.35? I'm not here nor there. Sometimes we do go a little bit on the conservative because they're lending money. We can get sued on our opinion.
Absolutely.
So yes, sometimes we do go, maybe we will go more conservative than aggressive. But if I know that in order to avoid paying LMI, and it's 20%, 80% loan, if I go 135, I was tossing up between that anyway. It can help me help them. Yeah. And I really wish valuers were given the privilege of writing a range.
Yep.
And then the banks lend on that range depending on the client's risk appetite or the client's risk. For instance, it's worth, because it's really hard to pinpoint, and that's where we get a bad rap. So if I could say it's worth between 1.3 and 1.35, you lend, or within 10%, you lend within that,
Yep.
depending on whether you see them as a high risk or low risk.
Yep.
Just within that range. That would make a lot more sense. But we don't. We have a figure, and it's that figure or nothing. It's like
Now,
that
this
or nothing.
This is going back on your experience. Just really want to, see where your gut is and your brain and your mind, your experience, your years in the industry. But we've got this notion that properties always go up in value, and we've got numerous data suggest that it does, and it has its peaks and troughs. But I think for many new investors that are out there, or people that invest in for a long time, as a valuer, have you ever gone and seen an area where you've valued the property or seen values of the areas below where maybe you valued them a year or 2 years ago? Has that ever happened to you?
Yes. So fun fact, I've actually sat in front of a judge. I've done over 15,000 properties. I've lost track. I don't know. Could be 16, could be 18. I don't know. I've sat in front of a judge for one of my jobs. I valued it for $370,000. It was a brand new duplex out in Maryland, that way. And 3 to 4 years later, it sold for $250,000. Okay. And I had to justify, they made a loss. I told them it was worth $370,000. They thought it was probably worth closer to $330,000. I had a duty of care to provide them with the right estimate. I didn't. I'll see you in court. Had to defend myself. So anything over the last 5 years, I think, has been erratic. And I think what I'm trying to say is there has been no rhyme or reason to why things have happened. Okay, inflation's gone up. It's coming back down again. The tariffs at the moment is causing chaos in the market. Hopefully, I think in the next year or two, if things start to stabilize, and again, going back to what I was saying about the fingers and being human beings like stability. We like when we know what's happening and we can make clear and conscious decisions. Over the last 5 years, we've made some crazy decisions as a human race because our backs have been up against the wall. We've seen things that we never thought we would see, right? And it's made us do crazy things, and there's a sense of FOMO was in the market for everything. So hopefully moving forward and we have some stability in life, people can start making more rational decisions, and we might see the market leveling out.
It's definitely been a very irrational 5 years when you talk about people going out and buying bundles and bundles of toilet paper and almost running out.
That's my point.
It's been a very interesting time for consumers, for investors, and you're right. There's been definitely a lot of luck. I know I had bought properties and developed properties during that period of time and thought no way would it get that type of price on a sale perspective, and it did, and it definitely exceeded my expectations and made more money than I thought it would. And then there's been some other things that I bought and thought, wow, this is going to be an absolute killer of a site and make a lot more money, and I've had to sell it prior to even building it because the numbers just make sense. So it's good to hear from you just that, there's a lot of volatility. People are wanting stability. Valuers are interpreting what's happening around them, and I think that's a conscious thing we all need to be aware of as investors. Is that in the end, you're governed. Your wealth is governed by the banks. It's governed by professionals such as yourself, and they're there to assist you in the sense of hopefully not making a bad decision. But we don't get it right all the time. And some valuers may be more conservative or more aggressive than others, and could be the luck of the draw for the valuer perspective, or it could be the luck of the draw of where you bought. It could be a hotspot where you've purchased and there may have been a sharp increase in prices, but at the same time, you've also got to look at what Belinda mentioned, which is stability. and sometimes buying in a stable market where you might not get those huge increments of growth very quickly, but it does give you the stability of a marginal amount of growth over a number of years, which sometimes to me sounds a bit better because you're not having to then pick and choose when you get in or when you get out. Which then leads me to my next question. We've got a world which is driven by AI. Everything's AI, from ChatGPT to Monday.com. There's ads going out there that if you're in your mid-50s, there's a 30-day or a month challenge where you learn a new AI program every day of the month for 30 days. I can't escape it. It's in every little ad that I watch. So we've got desktop, and anyone out there that's listening, you've got two types of valuations: a desktop valuation, which is essentially just like a core logic report, essentially, or a report that the bank wants you to do, and it gives you a range. And then you've got physical inspections, which is what you guys do, either via curbside, go and look at the property, make sure it's actually there. And then you've got physical inspections where you guys are walking through the premise. The question I've got to ask is, how accurate are these desktop valuations from the bank? And is it better to be getting a physical valuation, a curbside, or desktop? How do we know where we should be or what we should be doing as investors? Should we be requesting that or leaving it up to the broker? Because most brokers love desktops because it's quick, it's easy, and we'll get the loan over the line. But then are we leaving some money on the table? So I would love to hear your thoughts on desktop versus curbside versus physical full valuations.
So a desktop still needs the intervention of a valuer. And I think it all comes down to the risk that the bank sees on your property and you as a borrower, essentially. So if you're not borrowing much, if your LVR is quite low, they're going to see that as low risk, and they're going to do a desktop because the margin's not quite there. Then I guess we used to call them drive-bys until we were like, imagine somebody intercepts our phone and be like, you got to drive by at this address, you got to drive by at this location at this time. So curbside it is. They are a little bit more advanced, but I think with the technology that we are getting at the moment, they're few and far between the actual curbsides. They're all desktops now because of that factor. Now, here's a fun fact. If you have a valuer that physically comes out to your property, you probably know this with all your clients, it's virtually impossible to get the valuer to change their mind. Because, like I said, I sat in front of a judge. You have to justify that document in a court of law. And imagine the judge is like, excuse me, Miss Botzolis, but you initially valued that property at $400,000. Now you valued it at $370,000. They've made a loss. How are you so sure it was worth $370,000 if you weren't so sure on the first time round at $400,000? My credibility shot, right? So it's really, really hard unless you've got absolute evidence to prove otherwise. You're better off starting at a desktop, and whether or not that fits in with your borrowing motivation, then you can easily object. Easy. So we have all these clauses in the back saying we haven't gone in, we haven't even inspected, this is all an estimate, we don't even know what the inside looks like. If you're not happy, you can object, where a report is really like, it's hard.
What it is what you get.
What it is, and we won't change it unless, like I said, there's some real substantial evidence. So I would say if you're okay with your desktop, stick with it. If you really think that the valuer did you dirty, then just request. It's not that hard. But don't go straight to the internal inspection. Maybe just start with the desktop if you can, and then object to that. And I think tell the valuer on site what you want it to be valued at.
So actually give them a bit of an indication.
Yeah, respectfully.
Yep.
Respectfully. And sort of say, look, I think it's worth $2 million. Realistically, I think it is. I mean, you're going to base your valuation on whatever you want to base it off. But I think if you have a look at the sales, again, if I'm valuing it and I'm like, oh, is it 195 or is it 2 million? Oh, they were pretty nice on site. They gave me some good sales, and you know what? I can understand when they were coming from. I'm going to put 2 on it.
So put the effort in is what you're literally saying. And I've done that many times, met the valuer at the property. It's a bit hard if you're investing in a state. If you're from Sydney, going all the way to Perth to meet the valuer, it might be very expensive and timely exercise. But, if it's local or somewhere close to you, don't be afraid to go out there and meet them. Offer them a cup of coffee. Don't be rude. I think that's probably one of the biggest things. People are very very angry or very forceful, and in the end the valuer has their reputation, a credential that they need to make sure they uphold, morals and ethics and all those other things. But I was very open and honest with them what I was doing. I needed this particular valuation to extract that equity to buy that property. I didn't ask for anything absurd. My property was worth $550 at the time. I didn't ask for $900, and I did present them a couple of materials that I had found from recent properties which I thought were inferior in nature, maybe a little bit lesser than my property, and they still sold for decent prices. And lo and behold, I got that mark that I wanted, with some comments that I didn't really think it was required at that stage. The bathroom needed a bit and it's over there, but all in all it got to where I wanted to be. So I think that's an important note. Go out there, speak to the valuer if you get a chance. Actually speak to them and tell them what you're doing, because they might be very open and honest with you from the very start and say, guys, what you're doing is probably a little bit too much, but if you maybe do XYZ, bathroom, landscaping, paint the roof, a couple little things, I can actually then start to compare it to a property that could be more inferior but mostly on the same level. Yeah. So, property valuation or property valuers sometimes are seen as your best friend when they get you the result and your worst enemy when they don't. So I always big believer, if you know a property valuer or can pay even for a property valuer before you go to the bank, if it's in your budget, it's worthwhile doing it, because you guys do private property valuations, not just for banks, but valuations for people. And there's no one going to be better than you guys to actually indicate to an individual of what their property is maybe worth and what things they can do to improve the value. So when you do go to the bank, you've got a good property that's been independently valued, and now when the bank valuer comes through, there's an opportunity there to actually hit the number that you're after. So I've done it many times, paid valuers independently to go out there and value the property, so it gives me a bit of a scope and understand of what I do with my portfolio next. I've actually asked them for what things I can do to improve the value, and sometimes they've been very little things. Landscaping, Jeremy, paint the driveway, do the landscaping. Your roof looks like it's about to fall apart, so if you paint it, I can say it's a nice new roof or looking like a new roof, and all of a sudden it improves the value. Yeah. So little things like that are important. I've got another question here, which is more so around houses and units. Now, while in the long term we believe majority of houses always go up in value, but it hasn't probably been the case for units over maybe the last 10, 15 years. Not painting every unit with the same brush, but a majority. Can you open up why we're still seeing, very small movements in the unit market? And it leads me to another question I want to ask, is that does the builder of those units, the developer of those units, sometimes sway your decision as to why they may not go up in value? Can you give us any elaboration on that? I invested in units and I made a lot of money. I was able to very quickly leverage off my units and renovate, and then I sold it and I was able to build my home that I'm living in now with my family. So I was very lucky. I would say that units prior to the pandemic were amazing for investors to get into the market when they got smaller budgets. I'm talking about established properties, guys, not brand new. So let's just park the brand new stuff just for a second. Sorry, just to put the picture for everybody. Established units, we're talking the 3-level up. I would say 90s down. 90s down. Yeah. So if anyone's been to Sydney before, you go into those areas like your inner western suburbs of Sydney or your older units in the southwestern suburbs or western suburbs, there's real red brick. Yes. Maybe European built units from the sweat of his brow, ones that have stood the time of 30, 40 years with no cracking or issues like that. So you're talking about those type of units? Yes, yeah. And the reason I say that is they were always seen as an affordable entry point into an area that you wanted to live, okay? And I think that all changed again, the pandemic. And I know from experience, I sold a unit in 2017. Peak of the market. Yeah. Before Royal Commission. Correct. When things were still doing very well. Yes. And I would say, again, I use my hands a lot. My background is European. So if you're watching this and if you're listening, so follow with me. Imagine you have two parallel lines like a train track. That's how houses and units' percentage of growth were continuing for many, many years. There was even a point where units were outperforming houses in terms of growth, okay? So the gap between units and houses were all like train tracks increasing. When the pandemic hit, it changed everything for units. We were in lockdown. Who wanted to stay in a unit
Nobody. And being in Sydney had this sort of stigma about the West and the Southwest. Oh, you're a Westie. I wouldn't be caught dead living out West, blah, blah, blah. And I think the pandemic changed that a lot. It changed it in the sense that we now saw the people that put value in living in a location now saw value in, you know what, I am actually going to go Southwest and buy a new house and land package that I could probably have for a unit. And our values changed, what we wanted from a home changed, and property is only worth what a willing buyer is prepared to pay for and a willing seller. All of a sudden you had a product, it's just like anything that you buy at the shops. We all of a sudden had a product that nobody wanted. Think about I don't know, this just popped in my head. No one buys iPods anymore, because the music is all on our phone, yeah? So all of a sudden, Blockbuster, there's no more Blockbusters because there's no market for it. The market for units had disintegrated, basically. Nobody wanted a unit. Everybody wanted a house with a yard. All of a sudden, they're putting more value on a physical home, be it in a northwest, southwest, western suburbs, and all of a sudden, this stigma has kind of dropped a little bit in Sydney. The goal is, I have a house in Sydney, period. Not I have a house in the inner west or the eastern suburbs or the southwest. Diehard Sydney people will still have that stigma with certain parts of Sydney.
I want my piece of dirt.
That's exactly what it came
land
to.
That no one can take, or there's no issues. And then that leads me on to, and thank you for answering that question, because it gave concept, right? It's important for people to understand when market dynamics change, stigmatisms around properties and what people want. Just because it's there doesn't mean that it could be valuable or as valuable as you think it is. Then we all know, we've heard a lot about issues with unit builders, units cracking, units sinking, strata issues. There's someone who knows someone with a horror story about some unit. Does the developer who built it, or a new developer who built it, does it ever come into play when you're valuing a unit? This XYZ's built it. I know they've built 4 or 5 other units around specific locations and they do shoddy work. Does that ever come into your equation? Because I have heard of banks blacklisting some unit blocks and also blacklisting some developers because they know of many issues of prior blocks. Does the valuers get that level of insight, and do you take that into account when valuing a property?
Absolutely. So I think prior to this podcast, you and I had a little chat, and now I understand your question, because sometimes we might get a new developer. We don't know anything about them, so it's really hard for us to make a determination on the quality of that build. But yes, there are certain areas. We all know what happened at Homebush. For those that don't know, there was a complex and it had a huge structural issue. And that has now set some really solid and really important precedents moving forward around how developers take responsibility. Some really interesting casework there if you get really nerdy and want some bedtime reading. But I would say that, yes, we know. Banks tell us in advance. You can get developers that are blacklisted. And it's so unfortunate if you are caught up in all that, because there's some, we all know, again, Mascot. It was blanket blacklisted. And you could potentially have a unit there, and it's a great complex. But the banks have gone, we've got too much exposure into that area, okay? We've got too many. So CommBank might turn around and say, we have now reached our capacity of 15% exposure into this area, this market. We are no longer lending. And then St. George is like, okay, we've capped at 15%. We are now, and you can't find anyone to lend you property or refinance there. And that can be really unfortunate if you get caught in the crossfire. How do you know if your building has been blacklisted? Unfortunately, there's no database out there. It's something that valuers, again, because of the community or the profession that we have, we get information given to us. There's this legal proceedings that have happened all the time. We do valuations for courts. So this is information that we get privileged, information given to us. The banks will tell us. And unfortunately, to a valuer, if the bank says jump, you say how high, they're our client.
Yeah.
So if they're telling us that a property is everything has a value. But if that value is then determined on factors outside of your control, it can make or break your property, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So there's a couple good things there for people to understand that, just because it may be a great area doesn't mean necessarily that all properties in that area are equal. Understanding potentially a valuer's opinion of that building, of that developer, because they are doing so many things and valuing so many different properties in a year that they get to kind of see where the market is. They get a lot of commentary from the banks. In the end, they're the people that are lending us the money and giving us the opportunity to continue to buy. Now, I'm going to ask 3 rapid fire questions.
Let's go.
So we're going to get our hands going. We've got Italian and Macedonian, but Greek last name. So we do talk with our hands, and hopefully we don't kill each other while we do it with our flailing hand movements. But I want to know 3 best things we can do to value our home. So let's start with number 1. Hit me.
When you say add value or value?
Value to I want to add value to my homes. Give me 3 easy, quick ways to do it to improve the value the most.
Okay, this is a no-brainer. It's just painting. I've said this a million times. Just paint your home, okay? Because it looks fresh, it looks new. You hide all the defects. A potential buyer walks in and goes, "Do I smell paint?" I literally smell money, because it means I don't have to spend it. Yeah, and it's like a car. It's like when you wash your car, how much better does it look?
Absolutely. Nothing gets the new car smell.
So equivalent to a car wash is painting your home. One that's really underestimated is landscaping.
So number 2, landscaping.
Landscaping, I could say this till the cows come home, literally. Your home is like the first thing anybody sees. And is the first thing that somebody will see on the apps, the real estate or the domain.com, whatever you're using. They'll see your home. They'll see the front of your home. If your home looks good, think about speed dating. Oh, she's cute. Hi, hey, what's your name? Yeah. Oh, he's all right. Yeah, whatever your flavour is, that's the same as a home.
You see, my version of landscaping is concrete in the whole backyard. Like many other typical, wogs or Italians, we concrete the backyard. So when we need to mow it, we just get the hose out and wash the concrete.
Well, depending on where you are. So I've got family in Melbourne, in Thomastown. Everyone's concrete. It's valuable. My neighbour next door, she's Greek, and whenever I talk about landscaping, she's like, "Belle, my backyard's concrete." And I was like, "Rhonda, for you, it's valuable, babe. You don't change who you are." She's like, "I don't want to cut the grass. I'm always out with the kids." And I'm like, "You do you." So, yeah, when it's your home, you do what you want. But guys, if you're wanting to add value, sorry, Rhonda, rip the concrete up and put the grass down, because it's worth more to the market.
And number 3?
I would say understanding and having a really honest discussion to yourself on whether or not you need to spend the money to change either the bathroom or the kitchen. Mm-hmm. And I know that's a real, everyone's changed the bathroom and the kitchen, but I've seen kitchens where I'm like, I would have ripped that out. And I've gone into other homes where they're like, "Oh, we're getting finance because we want to put a new kitchen in." And I'm like, there's nothing wrong. Save your money, because you're going to spend 60 grand to add 50 grand, and you're actually over capitalizing. Yeah. Or you're spending 50 to add 60, and it's like you're doing all this for 10 grand, and I'm just like, it's not worth it. That money could have been put elsewhere to add even more value to the home. So it's about really understanding on whether or not a new kitchen and bathroom is necessary. Don't do it just for the sake of doing it because you think you're ticking that box that says kitchens and bathrooms add value. They add value, but sometimes not as much as the cost to install it.
Beautiful. So 3 rapid fire questions. We've got number 1, painting. Give your house that new car smell. Number 2, don't be like Rhonda. Get the landscaping being done.
I hope she's not watching this.
Poor Rhonda. I'm with you, Rhonda. Concrete away. Concrete as much as you can. And number 3 is really making that decision and picking and choosing between, hey, I've got a pool of money. Do I get the kitchen done or do I get the bathroom done? Speak to a real estate agent, maybe speak to even a property valuer, someone with a bit of industry knowledge, and see where not just where you think the value is, because in the end, you're not buying your own property, someone else is. So you've got to make that property appeal to someone else's taste. I'm just going to ask one more question. I get this question asked of me many times. I've built many granny flats. I own many properties with many granny flats on them, and I know I build them not to improve value, but to improve my rental cash flow. Why don't granny flats generally provide us a substantial value lift? Why is it when we spend $250 on a granny flat, it's brand, it's spanking, it's new, it's clean, it's fresh, it's getting the rent, why are you valuers only valuing the property at pretty much what I paid for it, or a little bit of what the value was, plus the cost of the granny flat? Why aren't they valuing it more than that?
Okay, I'm going back to my little friends. Hello, my fingers are up again. That is because if you stick a granny flat in the back of your property, I'm dropping half my hands down, there's only 3 fingers left, you're pretty much only appealing to 30% of the market.
Yep.
You have isolated your home now from almost potentially having 80% of the market look at it, because you've got first home buyers will be interested, families, downsizers, developers, whoever's in the market will be looking at that property. All of a sudden there's a granny flat in the back. Mum and dad with the kids are now out because they want a yard, potentially put a pool or the dog to run around, the kids, they're out. You've also now increased the value of the home, and for that area, if you're $200,000 up, they're like, well, I don't want, because the value sits in the main home. And now all of a sudden you're like, well, I don't want a crappy little 3-bedroom home with a granny flat in the back for that money. I'd rather have a good 5-bedroom home.
Yep.
They're out. Yeah. So then you've only isolated it out to 3 in the market, and you're really only appealing to maybe intergenerational living people.
Yep.
So the kids at the front, the parents at the back, or vice versa, or investors. And they are probably not going to be somebody that overpays, and they're going to be head valuers, meaning that they're head buyers, meaning that they're going to value with their head, not their heart.
Looking for a deal, right?
Correct.
They're looking for a deal, and I think that's very important. So, if you're wanting to do a granny flat, and I made a conscious decision on many of my properties because land tax was becoming a bit nasty, so I wanted to improve my rental income, and these are properties I wanted to hold longer term. There's good yield based upon the cost that I spent. That granny flat provides really good cash flow, which gives me opportunity then to hold more capital growth orientated properties. But not necessarily am I going and seeking capital growth. It may come organically through inflation, but not necessarily am I going to see spikes that really owner-occupied dominated areas and dominated properties would provide. So it was good to hear from yourself, again, a property valuer, that when you are building a granny flat, you are appealing to only, again, we'll use our fingers, three out of the 10 or 30% of the market, which may be deal-focused, not necessarily willing to overpay based on emotion, and therefore you're not going to get a substantial increase in terms of the capital value, i.e. spending $1 and maybe getting $1.50 in return.
It's also great. I'm qualified to do depreciation schedules, and for that fact alone, the increase in rent and the depreciation can add so much value to you as the homeowner, and somebody buying does not have that same mentality because they're not doing it for tax. They're not doing it for offsetting, whatever they wanted to offset. So if the value sits more with you than the market, then the market isn't going to pay for your added value for you and your portfolio. They're not paying for you. Market
sets the price. That's one of the biggest things
Correct.
that you've got to make sure that you listen to and take away from today's episode. It's market sets the price.
And market are the people.
And their fingers, market other people. You want as many fingers on Belinda's hands staying up as you can, because that's key, right? A lot of the things that you do aren't necessarily for you. If you're using property as a vessel to make money, whether it's from capital return or rental income, you've got to ensure that you're doing things to meet the market. My wife is one of those people that does things to meet the market all the time. If you ask me, again, I'll be concreting the whole backyard and probably painting all the walls in my house black or blue. But that's not what the market's going to be prepared or pay a lot of money for. So important that if you're doing granny flats on your property, you're really doing it for yourself to add value and cash flow to your internal portfolio. You're not doing that to meet sometimes the market demand. And that's why you're probably not getting those really big value increases from people like Belinda or other valuers, because they understand what you're doing, but not necessarily is it in tune with what the market wants.
We're not the bad guys. Yeah. I promise.
Give them a cup of coffee next time they come to your house.
Oh, you said that important. Before. No, actually, okay, quick fun fact. A cup of coffee can be seen as a bribe.
Is that right?
Yeah. Do not. You can offer us. I've had some pretty persuasive little Greek nonnas. You must take the coffee and the biscuit. Sit. And I'm like, oh shit. Okay. and I do, but believe it or not, I got to declare it when I get back to the office.
Is that right? A cup of coffee you got to declare?
Yeah. Anything we
accept. How about a glass of water?
Okay. I don't.
What
Not for the water.
What I'll do to get around, I'm a big fan of
Put
always
some vodka in?
getting around the rules. You just leave a cup of coffee on the table, and if they want to invite themselves to that, then I'm sure they don't have to disclose they invited themselves to have a cup of coffee. But we'll leave that one out of it because we're
Don't give us the coffee.
definitely playing in the space where we don't want to go to. But guys, I wanted to just share with you today that having Belinda on board as a valuer, it's one of my secrets as a sophisticated investor. I've got lots of valuers I know. I've followed a lot of Belinda's content in the past. So again, I'm a bit of a fan.
Thank you.
It's exciting to have you here on What School Should Have Taught You. They offer so much value more than just being someone there to say yes or no to you getting more equity out or helping with your loan. They've got a lot of value and knowledge that you can ask, pay for, and that's going to give you much better results when you're using property as a vessel, as I said, to make money from development or capital growth or rental returns. They get to see so much value over the time that they really can give you a lot of those golden nuggets early on and point you in the right direction. Belinda, I want to say thank you for having
You're welcome.
bringing your fingers on the show today. It's been a pleasant experience to have you sitting next to me, and I'm actually excited to see more of your content. So if you want to see more of Belinda, go to her Instagram page, Belinda the Valuer.
Yes, nice and simple.
And her website is?
So it's addvaluer.com because I help you add value to your home.
There you go. So if you want to get Belinda's help, reach out to her. Content's amazing. Website's there. As I said, valuers just aren't there for you to utilise when you're getting a loan from the bank, from a bank-appointed valuer. I've often paid valuers myself to get an understanding of my property and what things I need to do to improve it. And it's those little 1%ers that you do which will add a substantial amount of more value to your portfolio and ultimately get you what you need in the long term. I'm Jeremy Iannuzzelli. This is What School Should Have Taught You. Stay tuned for our next couple of episodes because I'm really going to be bringing in some big hitting professionals, people that I have in my inner circle. These are the people that I would say are my secrets, and they've definitely helped me gain the level of success to build my portfolio and a number of my clients' portfolios as well to where they are today, having over $20 million worth of wealth. Look forward to seeing you next time. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you're on YouTube, thumbs up if you're listening to us on Spotify, and that is What School Should Have Taught You.